Think back to when a man spilled orange juice on the most famous woman in the world, walked her back to his flat, showed her out the door and said, "Surreal but nice," and then immediately winced at himself in the hallway. Notting Hill landed in cinemas in May 1999 and did something no one expected. It made a London travel bookshop feel like the most glamorous address on earth. Julia Roberts plays Anna Scott, the most famous actress in the world, untouchable, photographed everywhere, exhausted by all of it. Hugh Grant plays William Thacker, recently divorced, quietly broke, sharing a flat with a man who answered the door to a wall of paparazzi wearing nothing but his underwear and thought this was going well. Richard Curtis wrote it. Roger Michell directed it. It earned $364 million worldwide on a $42 million budget, which makes it the highest-grossing British film of its time, and it gave us the most quoted love confession of the entire decade. Today we're going back into the making of it with 15 things you didn't know. The real affair the script is based on, the actress who called it the dumbest idea she'd ever heard, the studio that was being dissolved while the cameras were rolling, and the secret hidden in the very last frame, put there by a director who never lived to make the film it pointed to. Before we dive in, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films that shaped us. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the bookshop that refused the movie and became famous. Anyway, the Travel Bookshop on Blenheim Crescent, the real independent travel bookshop that inspired William Thacker's shop, told the production they couldn't film inside. The owner said no. So the crew built an exact replica at Shepperton Studios, drove Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant into it every day, and shot all the interior scenes on a set that didn't exist at the actual address. Then Notting Hill opened. Tourists descended on the real bookshop in their thousands, demanding to see the location from a movie that was never filmed there. Staff told them nothing was shot inside. Tourists didn't believe them and kept coming. Here's the kicker. The film that made an independent bookseller into the most romantic figure in British cinema drove up rents and property values across the area so dramatically that the real travel bookshop eventually couldn't afford to stay open. It closed in 2011. Curtis himself sold the house behind the famous Blue Door for over £1.3 million shortly after the film came out, and later admitted he regretted what it did to the area's character. The exterior of the shop, Grant arriving, pausing at the window, going in, was filmed at 142 Portobello Road, then an antiques arcade called Nichols, which the production dressed as a bookshop. The production just couldn't build the interior there. What tourists cannot find is the interior, the travel books, the cluttered counter, the back room where Grant and Roberts had their first conversation. That was built at Shepperton Studios and no longer exists. The address is now a souvenir gift shop. There's a sign in the window that says the Travel Bookshop. The fame of a story the building refused to be part of is what keeps it in business. Number 14. Julia Roberts set her real salary on screen. At Honey's birthday dinner, someone asks Anna Scott how much she made on her last film. She answers without blinking, $15 million. That is precisely what Julia Roberts was paid to make Notting Hill. But here's the thing. The script didn't say $15 million. According to IMDb and multiple production sources, Curtis originally wrote a different figure entirely. During filming, Roberts changed it on the fly. She went from $10 million to $12 million and then landed on 15, and when Hugh Bonneville's character asked her afterward why she kept changing the number, Roberts said she was tired of lowballing. The $15 million in the birthday dinner scene is the salary Roberts decided she was worth, said by the character she was playing, on the day she was earning it. 36 cents of every dollar went to the lead actress before a single frame was shot. The entire film, the crew, the locations, Rhys Ifans living in a campsite, cost $27 million once you subtract Julia Roberts. Here's what makes the scene work beyond the number. Anna earns $15 million per film. She also in this scene has just been cornered by paparazzi outside William's flat and photographed in yesterday's clothes. The money doesn't protect her from any of it. Fame doesn't protect her either. Curtis built a scene where $15 million and a bad back exist in the same moral universe, separated by zeros, not by anything that actually matters. Number 13. The biggest rom-com. Opening happened against Star Wars. Memorial Day weekend, 1999. Star Wars The Phantom Menace had opened 9 days earlier and had already crossed $200 million, reaching that mark faster than any film before it. Every other studio had looked at The Phantom Menace and cleared out of its way. The Love Letter, starring Kate Capshaw, had opened the previous weekend as counter-programming and made $4.3 million total. Hollywood had its answer. Nobody goes near Star Wars. Universal put Notting Hill directly in its path anyway. The Variety headline that weekend read, Jedi Masters $200 million. Mark, use Notting Hill counters with $28 million. Star Wars made $64.8 million over 4 days. Notting Hill made $27.8 million, the largest opening weekend in the history of romantic comedies. Exit polls showed 68% female audiences, 65% over 30. It beat Julia Roberts' own previous record from My Best Friend's Wedding by more than $6 million. Nikki Rocco, head of distribution at Universal, told reporters, "We are absolutely thrilled. A film about a man who sells travel books and can't form a sentence opened in second place behind the most anticipated film of a generation, broke a genre record, and ran for months. The week after, it dropped only 26%. That hold told the story. The audience wasn't curious or counter-programming overflow. It was people who specifically wanted to see it, going back and bringing someone. Every studio that had cleared out of Star Wars' path had accidentally left a lane wide open, and it turned out that lane was full. Number 12, Anna Scott's nightmare happened to Julia Roberts. At the London premiere in May 1999, Julia Roberts walked the red carpet in a Vivienne Tam sequined cowl-neck dress, raised her arm to wave at the crowd, and revealed 2 dark tufts of unshaved armpit hair. The tabloids ran it for weeks. Magazine covers, end-of-year roundups, photographs with arrows drawn on them. The coverage split clean down the middle, half calling it disgusting, the other half calling it a brave feminist statement about beauty standards and Hollywood's demands on women's bodies. Roberts was the biggest female star on the planet, attending her own premiere, and the morning conversation was not about her performance. It wasn't about the film, Hugh Grant, or Richard Curtis. It was entirely about her armpits. Anna Scott spends most of Notting Hill trying to escape cameras. Roberts found them inescapable on the one night she was supposed to just stand there and wave. Roberts went on Busy Tonight in 2018 and settled it. I just hadn't really calculated my sleeve length and the waving and how those two things would go together and reveal personal things about me. No statement, no prior calculation. She raised her arm, the sleeve moved, and weeks of cultural discourse followed. She later told British Vogue that the whole thing still made her laugh, but that it had given her a complicated relationship with red carpets, standing there knowing that any gesture could become the story, regardless of what she was actually there to promote. Anna Scott, incidentally, spends most of Notting Hill trying to escape exactly that problem. Number 11. The actor who camped his way into character. There is exactly one cast member who is always going to be completely believable as Spike. Rhys Ifans plays the magnificently unwashed Welsh flatmate, and to ensure the performance was grounded in lived experience, or possibly just because he couldn't face the commute, he pitched a tent at a campsite near Shepperton Studios and lived there for the duration of filming. Every morning, a studio limousine arrived at the campsite and collected him. The campsite owner assumed he was a wealthy eccentric. Ifans bathed occasionally when I remembered to, which he confirmed in a 2011 Interview magazine profile without apparent embarrassment. The prop trainers issued to his character smelled, in his own description, as though they came from the dark depths, a detail he shared with E! News in 1999 while the rest of the cast stood nearby and confirmed it. By the end of each day, the shoes were removed from set by the prop department and taken somewhere else overnight. They came back the next morning. The cast had no choice but to work with them again. Spike's most famous scene involves him walking out of the flat in his underwear and flexing his biceps at the assembled paparazzi with the total ease of a man who has stopped tracking social expectations. Which, given the campsite and the limousine and the shoes, is not a character decision Ifans had to reach very far for. Number 10, the role Kidman wanted and Roberts nearly rejected. While Julia Roberts was telling her agent the concept sounded like the dumbest idea of any movie I could ever do, Nicole Kidman was actively trying to get the same role. In 2020, promoting The Undoing alongside Hugh Grant, Kidman told him directly she'd wanted the part. Grant said, "Did you?" And Kidman said, "Yeah, I did. But I wasn't well known enough and I wasn't talented enough." Hold on. Nicole Kidman said she was not talented enough to be cast in a romantic comedy. At the time she said this, Kidman had been nominated for an Oscar for Moulin Rouge and had won one outright for The Hours. She had an Academy Award in her house and called herself unworthy of a role that the woman who got it had publicly called the stupidest idea she'd ever heard. Meanwhile, Roberts read the script on the flight to London and changed her mind before landing. Producer Duncan Kenworthy later recalled that the casting lunch was very clearly her auditioning us, not the other way round. Roberts sat across from Curtis, Kenworthy, and Michelle and decided whether she wanted to make their film. They needed her considerably more than she needed them. Curtis and Kenworthy had already done 4 weddings and a funeral together. They knew exactly what a British romantic comedy needed to break through globally, and it was a star with the kind of face that made the rest of the world feel included. Number 9, the public disaster that made Grant more believable. In June 1995, Grant was in Los Angeles to promote 9 Months, his first major Hollywood film. Days before the promotional run began, he attended a screening. He told Mark Maron on his podcast, "Everyone in it was brilliant, but I was so atrocious that I was not in a good frame of mind." He then had what he called, without further elaboration, a Ken Russell kind of lunch. At 1:30 a.m. on Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles Vice officers noticed a BMW with brake lights flashing erratically. The driver kept pressing the pedal. They investigated. Grant was arrested with a woman named Divine Brown. He was charged with indecent conduct in a public place. She was paid $60. He was already booked on The Tonight Show to promote 9 Months. He showed up. Jay Leno opened with, "What the hell were you thinking?" Grant said, "I did a bad thing." That week, for the first time since Leno had taken over from Johnny Carson in 1992, The Tonight Show beat David Letterman's Late Show in the weekly ratings. Leno held the lead from that point forward. Grant did every interview. He took every question. He survived. 4 years later, Notting Hill cast him as a decent, bumbling man trying to protect someone famous from the indignity of public exposure. The audience believed him completely. And part of the reason William Thacker's fundamental decency reads as real is that they'd already watched Grant absorb his own public humiliation with more grace than anyone expected. The arrest that should have ended his romantic comedy career is what made it. 9 Months, the film he'd watched and hated himself in, the film that precipitated the whole disaster, made nearly $70 million at the domestic box office. Number 8. Notting Hill looked past its own history. The Notting Hill on screen in 1999 is blue doors and antique markets and charming white people in linen. What it is not is the neighborhood's actual history. In late August 1958, gangs of white youth spent 5 consecutive nights attacking the homes of black residents in the same streets the film later romanticizes. More than 140 people were arrested. In May 1959, an Antiguan carpenter named Kelso Cochran was killed on Goulbourne Road, steps from where the film's bookshop is set, in a racially motivated attack that was never solved. The Notting Hill Carnival was founded directly in response to the 1958 riots. A Trinidadian activist named Claudia Jones organized the first Caribbean Carnival on the 30th of January 1959, held indoors at St. Pancras Town Hall, not in Notting Hill itself because the British winter made an outdoor event impossible, to answer the violence with culture and community. 4 months later, in May 1959, Kelso Cochran was killed on Goulbourne Road. Jones doubled down. By 1999, when Curtis set his film in those streets, the area had gentrified dramatically. Not a single black character appears in the main story of Notting Hill. Curtis addressed this in a conversation with his own daughter, Scarlett, at a literary festival. He said he wished he'd been ahead of the curve. He admitted setting a film in Notting Hill with no black characters was, in his own words, stupid and wrong. The Notting Hill Carnival that Claudia Jones founded as a direct response to those riots now draws around 2 million people across August Bank holiday weekend every year, making it the largest street festival in Europe. It runs on streets the film romanticizes without acknowledging who built the culture there or why. The most beloved love letter to a London neighborhood is, its own writer now concedes, a film that looked straight past half of it. Number 7. Julia Roberts wore her own clothes for I'm Just a Girl. Roberts loathed the costumes. Playing a movie star meant being dressed like one, and every time she put Shuna Harwood's designs on, she felt, in her own words, so uncomfortable. The morning the production shot the I'm Just a Girl scene, Roberts looked at what wardrobe had prepared and said no. She sent her driver, a man named Tommy, back to her London flat. His instructions: flip-flops, a blue velvet skirt, a t-shirt, a cardigan. He drove there, went into her bedroom, collected them, and came back. That is what she is wearing in the scene. In a 2024 British Vogue interview, conducted by Curtis himself 25 years after filming, he told her he was always disappointed she hadn't worn something better. "I was always disappointed you weren't wearing a better costume that day," he said. That's the exchange. 25 years later, the writer interviewing his lead actress, and the thing he brings up is the cardigan. Robert smiled. She hadn't expected the line to become anything. Curtis, separately, has described himself as quite embarrassed by the line. His evidence that he suspected it was good being that he immediately had another character repeat it back in the very next scene, the way a songwriter plays a chord twice to make sure you heard it. The most quoted romantic declaration in 1990s cinema was delivered in clothes grabbed from a bedroom by a driver with no idea what he was assembling. The writer winced. The costume designer had prepared something better. None of it mattered at all. Number 6. Notting Hill may have been based on a real affair. Grant told E! News in 2018 that Curtis had let the story slip after a long evening. A friend of his, an ordinary guy, met a very famous woman at Harrods, took her back to his flat in Notting Hill, and they'd meet up whenever she came to London. The affair reactivated itself across visits for years. Curtis was too scared of anyone finding out who she was to tell the story publicly. Grant was under no such constraint. Reporting by the Scottish Daily Mail identified the friend as William Sieghart, a publisher and philanthropist Curtis knew from Oxford. The fictional character is named William Thacker. He lives in Notting Hill. The famous woman the paper alleged was Uma Thurman, who had divorced Gary Oldman in 1992 and was filming in London in 1994, the same year Pulp Fiction made her one of the most talked-about actresses on Earth. Curtis has never confirmed or denied the Thurman story. When pressed on his inspiration for the film, his official answer is that he imagined what it would be like to turn up at a friend's dinner party with Madonna or Princess Diana, which is a notably different answer from the one Grant says he heard over drinks. Number 5. The final frame. Held Roger Michel's lost future. In the final scene, William sits on a park bench reading a book. Grant revealed in a Wired interview that the book, Captain Corelli's Mandolin by Louis de Bernières, was placed there by Roger Michel as a private note to himself. Captain Corelli's Mandolin was his next project after Notting Hill. He put his own future into the last frame of his biggest film. Shortly after Notting Hill's release in 1999, Michel had a heart attack. He had to pull out of Captain Corelli's Mandolin. John Madden took over, Nicolas Cage, Penelope Cruz, $57 million budget, $62 million at the box office. Later, Michel was in negotiations to direct Daniel Craig in Quantum of Solace, the 2008 Bond film, and walked away before production. His reason, in his own words, "I was very nervous that there was a start date but really no script at all. It went to Mark Forster instead. Every film Michel stepped away from went to someone else and made less than it should have." Grant, rewatching the park bench scene for a Wired interview decades later, called it nauseating, then added, "God rest his soul." Roger Michel died on September the 22nd, 2021. He was 65 years old. He never returned to Captain Corelli's Mandolin. The book is still there, in every version of the film, in William's hands in the final frame, pointing toward a future Michel planned and never reached. He hid his ambitions in the happiest moment of the story: the bench, the pregnancy, the garden, the stillness of it. And nobody outside the production noticed for years. Number 4. The happy ending. Everyone involved questioned. On Oprah, Grant described Roberts as having a very big mouth, literally, physically. On Watch What Happens. Live in 2015, he said, Kissing scenes weren't entirely pleasant because I was aware of a faint echo as I was kissing her. He then admitted he'd probably made too many jokes about the size of her mouth and that she might hate me by now. They were not in touch at the time. By 2005, Roberts had said she'd forgiven him. The jokes had apparently not stopped. On the character, whenever I'm flicking the channels at home after a few drinks and this comes up, I just think, why doesn't my character have any spine? He calls William Thacker despicable and identifies the specific scene where Anna opens the door to the paparazzi and he just lets her go past him. I've never had a girlfriend, or indeed now wife, who hasn't said, "Why the hell didn't you stop her? What's wrong with you?" Grant doesn't have an answer to this. He thinks William deserved what came next. What came next, in Grant's view, is the ugliest possible divorce. Curtis actually wrote it, a comic relief short, William and Anna in a divorce lawyer's office, realizing they still love each other. He took it to Roberts. She called it a very poor idea and refused. Grant told Collider he imagines it happened anyway, off-screen with expensive lawyers and children caught in the middle. The most romantic British film of its generation. Everyone involved thinks it ended in catastrophe. Roberts told a journalist in 2005 she'd forgiven Grant. She did not specify which of his many comments she was forgiving him for. Number 3. The studio died. While its biggest hit was being born, Polygram Filmed Entertainment had produced 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Trainspotting, Fargo, The Big Lebowski, and Dead Man Walking. In 1998, Seagram, the Canadian spirits company, purchased Polygram for its music catalog. Only the music. 3,000 film division employees got notice. The studio that had built British cinema into a global competitor was being wound down. Notting Hill was in production, one of 16 to 18 orphaned films being evaluated by Universal, which inherited them from the wreckage. Variety reported on it in December 1998 as just another line item. Among all of Polygram's various production units, there are approximately 16 to 18 films awaiting release, including Notting Hill, a romantic comedy from Working Title starring Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts. Universal would now distribute the picture in the U.S. Nobody was sure what that meant for the film's future. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian attended Polygram's Cannes launch dinner for Notting Hill in May 1999. He described it years later as, ironically, at the end of its existence, the champagne was in a studio that no longer existed. Then the film came out. $364 million worldwide, the biggest British film of its era by distance. The studio that had been wound down during production had, in its final months, funded the highest-grossing British romantic comedy ever made. The Cannes dinner was a wake dressed as a launch party. Nobody said it out loud. The champagne was poured anyway. Polygram Filmed Entertainment officially ceased to exist in 1999. Its films, including this one, were quietly absorbed into Universal's catalog. The logo still appears at the start of Notting Hill. They left it in. Number 2. Notting Hill's sweetest performance ended too soon. Emma Chambers plays Honey, William's younger sister, the one who falls immediately and completely in love with Anna Scott, who proposes to Spike in the garden, who describes herself as having funny, goggly eyes and features. She is in the film for maybe 15 minutes total. Chambers had won a British Comedy Award in 1998 for her role as Alice Tinker in The Vicar of Dibley, a BBC sitcom that had run since 1994 and made her one of the most recognizable comic actors in Britain. Notting Hill was her first major film. She was 34 when she shot it. The performance she gives, the dinner party scene, her face when she realizes who is sitting across from her, is the kind of thing that should have opened every door in Hollywood. It didn't. She returned largely to The Vicar of Dibley, which ended in 2007. After that, she stepped back from public life almost entirely. On the evening of 21st February 2018, Emma Chambers had a heart attack at her home in Lymington, Hampshire. She was 53 years old. Her death was announced 3 days later. Hugh Grant wrote on Twitter that she was a hilarious and very warm person and, of course, a brilliant actress. Emma Freud, Richard Curtis's partner who had script edited the film, called her a great, great comedy performer and a truly fine actress. and a tender, sweet, funny, unusual, loving human being. She brought laughter and joy to many. She was 53 years old. Number 1, Richard Curtis wrote The Boy He Actually Was. Richard Curtis wrote a film entirely about a man too frightened to ask the woman in front of him to stay, then lived that story himself for 3 decades. He met Emma Freud in the early 1990s when she interviewed him about comic relief. She knew quite early on, she later said, that he was the man she'd spent her life with. She proposed to him on a leap day. He turned her down. She proposed again on February 29, 2014, on her Radio 4 show while he wasn't in the studio, banking on him listening from home. He fell asleep and missed it. When she brought it up in a pub that evening, he said nothing. They had 4 children across those 33 years. He named one of his sons Spike, after the character Rhys Ifans plays in Notting Hill. Richard and Emma married in secret in September 2023. He was 66 years old. The man who wrote the line about a girl standing in front of a boy asking him to love her was the boy. He wrote the film in the middle of that story and didn't resolve it for another 24 years. The line lands differently now, and there you have it. 15 facts about a film built from borrowed trouble. Roberts calling it stupid before she read it. Kidman calling herself unworthy with an Oscar in her house. Grant spending 25 years publicly insulting his co-star and his own character. A studio raising a glass at its own funeral in Cannes. And one woman in her own cardigan saying the most quoted thing of the decade while the writer winced and wished she'd worn something better. Which one hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments below and let us know who your favorite character in the film is while you're there. Like and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.